Welcome to Educate to Self-Regulate, a podcast for educational leaders, teachers, and students, where in less than 20 minutes, we unpack educational research to support you and your students to become better learners. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Educate to Self-Regulate. I'm super excited actually today to chat with two educators that have been playing in the space of self-regulated learning. And so I want to welcome Beck and Sam. Welcome to the Educate to Self-Regulate podcast.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thanks. It's so exciting to have you both here. Now, I've been having conversations with you along the way for a number of years now. Wesley College has been dabbling in the space of self-regulated learning in different ways, shapes, and form. And to have you both here to share some of the practice is very exciting. Now, Sam, can you tell me in one line what you do at Wesley College?
I'm a lead teacher and I support some staff at the moment with self-regulated learning, with agency, metacognition, and how to set up lessons to be more of a thinking classroom.
Fantastic. And what about you, Beck? In one line, could you capture that?
I'm a professional learning coach, which means I'm involved in facilitating personal professional learning at the school where we're providing teachers with time and agency to choose their passion project and reflect and implement in their classrooms.
Amazing. I often think about not only how we're teaching it in classrooms, but how we lead self-regulated learning in schools. And so to have both your perspectives here, I think that's really useful for our listeners. Now, because we are a 20-minute episode podcast, I want to get straight into it because I know that you've got a lot to share in terms of experiences, but I want to start with a very simple question. Why is teaching self-regulated learning important to you? And why has it been a focus at Wesley College for the last few years? Beck, I might start with you.
Yeah, okay. I've been teaching for a long time and I have noticed probably since about 2014 that students just being these passive passengers in their learning journey. And I started to sort of think about how can I sort of create some more ownership in the classroom. And so I started doing that and then I realized that the kids don't actually have the skills to do this. Then I came to Wesley and then met Sam and we started having these conversations about what we had noticed and this idea of giving students these skills so that they can take ownership of their learning and can sort of embrace the challenge that is being in the classroom and learning is hard. So that's sort of how it started. And then your book came out. Well, actually, first of all, you did a PL session with the Wesley staff. It was an online one. And that's sort of where the word self-regulated learning sort of really hit me. And then the book came out and having great conversations with Sam. And here we are now. So it really came out of observation of what I was seeing in the classroom and what students weren't able to do and what I then needed to do to allow them to do what I needed them to do.
Thanks, Beck. What about you, Sam? Is it similar reasons or?
Yeah, noticing that the students had kind of gaps in, we were presenting information, but they were just listening to it. They were really engaging with it. And so through, our work with self-regulated learning, they were really appreciating the effort that we were putting into them as learners, rather than just being consumers of our content. They felt like they were valued and we were progressing them as a learner. They were in control of their learning and they were active in it. And I guess just our students feeling that we were on board with them as a person and challenging them as a person rather than just deliverers of content.
Okay. Just to clarify, so a lot of this interest and focus has been driven by what you're seeing in the classroom, and it sounds like it's quite responsive to the learners in front of you, which is really lovely to hear. And I think that's so important to think about the context in which we're working with, to take kind of theoretical knowledge around self-regulated learning and say, right, okay, that's great, but does it fit with what we're seeing in the classroom? It sounds like it fits really well. So over the years, you've both been playing with a range of approaches for teaching self-regulated learning in the classroom. And I know our listeners are very keen for, teachers are very keen for pragmatic tools, isn't it? And so we'd love to hear some examples of how you've been experimenting in this space. Sam, I might start with you. What have you been doing over the last few years?
Yeah, so with the Year Nines, we developed an explicit lesson on self-regulated learning. And we started by giving them the why. Like, why was it important for them? What skills and what strategy that are they going to need for the future? How to get out of the learning pit and how these strategies were going to help them with those. And we also spoke about the cost of not taking action. If they didn't and if we didn't, what would that look like for them? So at the start of the lesson, we differentiated between self-regulated learning and self-directed learning and got the students to identify what was similar and what was different and change their understanding of it's not them doing it, it's how we're going to help them through this, self-regulation. And then we kind of went through that knowledge framework on page 30 of your book, actually, and decided to focus on 3 parts of the framework. And in particular, one was the help seeking. And we spoke about a front runner. We have a lot of students in sport or in music and looking at someone or in sport, how they model their game off someone else. And then talking about in the classroom, we got them to pick a front runner and we got them to write about what was that person doing in the lessons? What was the person saying in the lesson? And what do you think that person was feeling during the class? And so they thought about their front runner from our class and then they wrote down their answers. And it was so insightful.
Yeah.
I thought of the Year Nines going, oh, actually the front runner, they don't say much, but they ask good questions or, they probably feel confident. And actually I want to feel confident. And so we talked about what strategies does the front runner use or how could they model their game or their learning from that front runner. But I guess, rewind a term or so, and we've been really focusing on self-efficacy. So they had the confidence, they already had the motivation, they already had the drive to make these changes. And I think knowing that, we were on board with them and we had talked about self-efficacy, we had given feedback that promoted self-efficacy. We'd done weekly reflections, we'd done weekly goal setting, we'd, pumped them up as much as they could to be these flexible learners. And so when we talked about this front runner, they were already in a space to take on board these changes. And with their goal setting, their weekly goal setting, it might have been behavioural or it might have been, to complete their homework or setting their goals. And we could help remind them of that. We could, as I said to them, we can co-regulate for a little while until you can self-regulate. So, yeah, I think it was a fair bit of process in the making and paying attention to where we could explicitly teach these and how we could explicitly teach them. But yeah, just the changes. And we were talking yesterday about the inadvertent change of behaviour management. When we had self-regulated learners that were able to manage themselves, the need for us to behaviour manage had also decreased, that we could say, hey, what was your goal? Let's refocus on that. And that they were helping to manage each other with their goals and helping to regulate. And it was just that common language, I think, that
I think to build on that, these Year Nines, Sam and I had worked with them both last year as well in Year 8, where we really started to sort of introduce them to this idea of self-regulated learning and bringing in metacognition. And so at the end of each lesson, they were doing a reflection, like, what did you already know? What was new? What did you find challenging? What will you do to overcome this challenge? So getting to really start to explicitly think about what they're doing in the classroom, what their behaviours are. And again, showing them that, A, you need to take ownership of your learning, but you do have the skills to be able to take some control of your learning and that you aren't this passive passenger. And then at the end of the week, they would do the reflection journal where they really would go through and have a look at what they were achieving, where their challenges were. And we did tie that sort of in with student agency with the new metrics, which is what Melbourne University is working with. There's such a lovely blend, or I guess joining, of these two ideas of self-regulated learning and the agency and from the new metrics that we're just providing the students with a framework and an understanding of how they can take some control of their learning and that they can, and we believe in them, that you can do this. And as Sam was saying, the changes in the behaviour in that year 8 class was just phenomenal, in that it just made them a lot more conscious of themselves as learners, and that learning is an active process. We're not a passenger on a train. So I think that sort of is where it's come from. Sam has just had the opportunity to really build upon that this year with the year 9s, which is lovely, so that I think they're actually going to be in a very good place for when they go into year 10. They go up to senior school, goalpost shift. It's very different up the hill in senior school, but I'm feeling confident that these year 9s, when they become year 10s, are going to, really survive and thrive up in our senior school.
Thank you both for sharing. I had a moment where I was like, this is music to my ears. But for any of our listeners, I was madly writing notes, and I've written 3 big post notes of dot points. And I thought there is so much in here that if I was a listener, I would be playing this on slow and I would be going back and re-listening to parts. And I want to just try and clarify / paraphrase some of what you said, just to make it really clear for our listeners. So I'll pick out a few because there's so much in there. So it sounded like, Sam, you mentioned right at the start that you've been playing with value interventions, and I think, you used the phrase, what's the cost of not taking action? So really getting learners to understand why they're doing something. And I know in a range of subjects that is particularly useful as a motivator for learning. You did some conceptual work, right, around the knowledge framework and the self-regulated learning versus self-directed learning, particularly if that is a point of confusion for learners, that's useful to clarify. And then I really love the front runner stuff that you explicitly teaching them, this like notion of front runner. It sounded like you were using a bit of sort of empathy mapping, getting them to think about, what is that front runner thinking, feeling, saying, doing type stuff. And you said that was really insightful, right? That the students will gain quite a lot from that experience. So I love that. I think, again, if listeners are keen and trying, that's something that I would be trying. I won't go into everything here. I've got so many dot points. But Beck, you mentioned, for sake of a better word, I've written down metacognitive prompts, but you've been really embedding metacognitive prompts in your reflective conversations with learners. And then can you tell me a little bit more about the reflection journal? Because you mentioned it.
Yep.
But what does that look
Yeah. Well, it's from your book. I'd have to
The learning journal?
Yeah, the learning journal. Yeah. And so I basically took that and sort of just tweaked it a little bit, didn't do any major changes to it, but so that we could make it fit in with the new metrics. And so we brought in the criteria, the elements, I should say, of new metrics, and where they just naturally fitted with that learning journal. It was really important for the students to reflect on their week. They would be doing a daily reflection, but to actually sort of have that opportunity to reflect over the week, to sort of see how their learning has changed. Like, did they try a strategy? How did that go? What will you sort of continue doing next week? And then they would set a goal for the following week. And I mean, some of the reflections were just phenomenal. That to think that a 14-year-old was thinking this deeply about their learning and were able to articulate it so clearly. That being said, we did this term, late term 3, term 4. So we'd been really working on this. It wasn't an overnight success. We really sort of built up those prompts and getting the students to see reflection as part of the learning journey, and sort of guiding them on, like, when you say, what will you do next? And they go, study. Well, what does study look like? Like, you have to be explicit. Like, what are the steps you are going to take? So it sort of goes into that whole planning component of metacognition. And so that was just really powerful, to have students just take that time to really reflect on their learning. And then it's really set them up for what Sam's doing with them in year 9, as far as separating that self-regulated and self-directed learning.
So that's where I missed it, because I too have been having conversations with the University of Melbourne around the Melbourne Metrics program about this alignment between the two. And so you've actually kind of, in your reflection journals, taken the two and aligned them through those prompts. I love that.
Yep.
And I know there's a lot of schools that I work with that are involved in the Melbourne Metrics program. So that might be a point of inspiration for them in terms of thinking about learning journals. Now, we're already 15 minutes into our episode, as happens. So I want to make sure we get time for, as you might be familiar with, our On the Reg segment, where I invite guests, and I don't often have 2 guests. The last time Rory and I had 3 people on the call, was, I think it was like episode 5, and that was the only time we've ever had it. So this is, I'm going to defer to you and say, what's a strategy that you use individually, personally, to self-regulate as a learner? And Sam, I might start with you.
I think we both use the same strategy, but like we did with the nines, finding a front runner, whether that's someone who knows the content better than we do, or whether that's, oh, I need some help with this, or I'm struggling. We're just finding the right person to connect with that can help us, with whatever the challenge is, and just going, okay, I need help with, like I said, the content, who's someone that I could talk to. And I find that really helpful.
I definitely like, particularly teaching IB. So coming from VCE to IB, there are some, like, I mean, high school biology is high school biology, but there are some content differences. And so some concepts that have just never been part of the VCE. And last time I did them was, like, let's be honest, last century. So just being able to find someone, and, and sometimes it's not actually a person sitting near me. It might be a video that there are people who I will go to on YouTube that are really good at their job and at explaining what's going on. So, they're my front runners, and it's always very exciting when you meet them in real life as well. But that's definitely with content. But in my role as personalised professional learning program that I run, it is a massive job. There's 3 of us, 500 staff that we have to work through that planning and really breaking down what is it that we need our staff to do. We've worked really together as a team, so collaborated to go, this is what needs to be done by this week, by this week, by this week. So again, breaking down the project into the chunks so that we know what needs to be done, when it needs to be done, what will it look like, so that we can, again, like, evaluate as we're going through, are we executing what we need to execute and achieve what we want to achieve? So that's sort of what I do to self-regulate. I'm a big list fan as well.
Okay. So we've got the front runner strategy that you both activate as well. And then there's this strategic planning process that you have to undertake to manage this large scale kind of professional learning program. But you also use lists, which, yeah. Is there something particular about the way you use lists, Beck?
Oh, look, I mean, I've been guilty of, doing something that's not on the list, but it gets written on and highlighted off. So it makes myself feel much better about what's going on. But it is, I think it's important to sometimes, like, you look at that list and it can be really overwhelming, like thinking what has to be done today, but learning how to prioritize what needs to be done importantly, or if you are sort of struggling to start, what's an easy win? What's going to be a really quick highlighter off my to-do list so that I can kind of get the ball rolling? So I sort of engage with a number of activities with respect to my list, depending on sort of, am I really overstimulated that day? And so what can I do that's going to just calm everything down and get me sorted? Or is it prioritized, like, this just has to be done today, like, regardless of what's going on?
Fantastic. I love those. Those are metacognitive self-questions in themselves, aren't they, Beck? Where, through that decision-making prioritization, you're either asking what's easy for me to tick off, and therefore that's how you're prioritizing, or you're going, what's urgent to tick off.
Yeah.
If you're using something like the Eisenhower matrix, you might be asking yourself what's important as well, and so contrasting that urgency versus importance, which is always challenging for leaders and educators. A bunch of useful strategies, both for us as teachers, teaching pedagogy, but also as learners. So thank you both so much for joining me. I know this is it can be a daunting experience for educators, and I'm trying to get as many educators on this podcast as I can. So I really appreciate you both being here. Now, I had noted down here, what's the best way to connect? Beck, you're very active on LinkedIn, and I would suggest to listeners that they should connect with you and follow you, because you're very generous with the way you share kind of examples of practice. And I think that's so powerful. So is LinkedIn the best place to go?
LinkedIn is definitely the best way to contact me. Sam, I'm trying to convince to get onto LinkedIn, but I think it might be just, I don't know, it's going to be a really big hill that I'm going to have to climb for this one. So if you do want to reach out to Sam, by all means, contact me and I will pass on your details and Sam will get in touch with you. Or worst case scenario, give Wesley College a call and they will put you through.
Well, I will include that link in the podcast episode notes so people can connect with you, Beck, because I often see your posts and love some of the examples that you share. And I go, oh, that's an amazing example. Sometimes I'm even downloading the photos from you and writing underneath, like, this is Beck's example from this LinkedIn post. And, this demonstrates this. educators love examples from classroom and being able to
Yep.
see that. So thank you for doing that.
That's no problem.
It's been an absolute pleasure having you both on, and hopefully we can have you on again sometime in the future, maybe to talk further around self-regulated learning.
Awesome. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tim.
If you are a new listener to the podcast, make sure you share it with friends, save it, or subscribe. If you have any questions, and we really want to hear from our listeners, if you have any questions or comments, send us a DM through either of our social media channels, which is Twitter and Instagram at ed2selfreg. As always, to you and everyone else out there, keep regulated.